a payday. Come on.
All right, welcome to the Payday Podcast. I am excited. This is my first guest I've had that I kind of don't know as well because we just kind of met, but I'm super excited because I partner with her company. So here in the Cincinnati area, if you've heard of HR consulting, then you've heard of Strategic HR and Robin Throckmorton. And Robin and I have known each other a little longer. And she now has a business development person, but who has a very long HR background. And Becky is my guest today. She is going to be working with me on the Southern Ohio Chamber Alliance program. We both partner with tons of small chambers all around Southwest Ohio. Me for payroll, her for HR consulting. I am committed to making sure Payroll Partners stays in our lane of payroll and HR tech. We do not want to be the compliance people behind the scenes, and that is where we hope to bring you guys into a lot of our clients. And I'm so excited to have you here today, Becky. So, Becky, I have a question though. So, Strategic HR and the last place you worked, why is it that bigger CPA firms are getting more into HR and less into payroll? That is probably confusing to most consumers. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, they might be getting a little bit into payroll too with some of the controller outsourcing or fractional controller functions. But I would say that the accounting firms are getting into it because they want to be business partners across a variety of functions, not just financial. And the number one issue that's keeping CEOs up at night is people. And so having an HR consultant that they can pull in to talk to the business leaders that they're working with has been an important focus. And that's why Clark Schaefer Hackett has purchased Strategic HR. And so we are working together. We still work independently and work as we always have, but as a business partner that can be pulled in to some of those accounting clients that really need help with their people.
I have noticed this myself, and I think we're on the same page here. I don't know that other people realize, and even some HR folks, how much more power that they have within businesses because of this labor shortage that's going to be around for a couple decades and the people problem that businesses are dealing with. And I do feel like, because like early in my career, you kind of look at the dynamic between the CEO, the CFO, maybe the VP of sales, and I'm in sales. So I was always, most CEOs know who their salespeople are. And then you kind of saw that early view of HR and the old personnel department name and how that has evolved into, people and talent, and they're putting cooler names behind it. But the biggest thing is, like, if you're a CEO in 2023 and you're not given that HR leader more face time than you used to, and probably should be giving them more face time than your CFO and your VP of sales, you're probably not doing it right. Would you agree with that statement?
I would 100% agree. And I would also say that if you're not comfortable giving that HR person more face time, you might have the wrong HR person in that role. What's happened is HR traditionally, when you go back to the personnel department, it was looked at as a more administrative function, and it was put under, kind of that infrastructure of finance, which is how that linked to the accounting firms that we were talking about before. Yep. And so often the CFO became in charge of HR, and the CFO is like, I know numbers. I don't really feel comfortable in this space. So really having somebody who understands people, understands the support people need in order to do their jobs and be the best that they can be. And that's how you're going to keep people. That's how you're going to find the right people. And that's how your business is going to thrive. And so the leaders that understand that, I think, have had a big competitive advantage in this market that we're in right now. And those that don't are trying to get up to speed rather quickly.
Okay, awesome. So, today you're working for, these, you're in consulting. Your last few roles have been in consulting, but you've been that, mid-sized company HR person. You've probably been in a couple roles where you were kind of in that old school HR role, then you were in roles where you were at this, were, you know, the seat at the table. Tell me a little bit about, you know, your HR career and some of the places you've been and jobs you've had.
Yep, absolutely. So I have been in consulting the last 3 years, and I love that because I love the variety. I like talking to different companies, and being somewhat of a in that consultative coach role. But I started my career in the 80s. So going back to that, yes, I've seen a lot of manual processes and a
Yeah.
lot of that personnel department, but I started more in IT. I graduated from college with a technology degree and went to work for a Big Four, but it was Big Eight back then. So I've been connected to accounting firms my whole career, I feel like, but it was in the management consulting, and I was traveling. And because of that, just the balance was off. So I love the company, I love the people, and I took a role in staffing and recruiting because I knew the jobs, I knew what we did, so I could. It was primarily campus recruiting.
Yep.
And I loved it, just loved it. And then I did that for over 10 years and then stayed home with my kids for a while. There was that balance again.
Yeah.
And so I went back to work for a consulting company as my kids got a little bit older with some of the folks I had worked with before. I did that for years, and this consulting company grew, and it was all about people.
Yeah.
And so there was a big focus on HR and what we were doing. So I feel like I have gone from very tactical, and also this consulting company didn't have the infrastructure that the accounting firm did. So we were figuring out payroll, we were figuring out taxes, we were figuring out benefits. And so I really got a great lesson in all things HR. And also we were looking more strategically at how do we help people perform, and how do we develop, and how do we make sure that we have a workforce that can do this work that we're trying to do. And then during COVID, and again, balance situations, consulting seemed to be the better option. And I love that. I've primarily worked with smaller companies and focus on people, and I have a broad background, and usually even some of the tactical things I can look up or call on resources like Matt to help figure out some of the details that I may not know.
I too, I'm right there with you. I made some big moves because of COVID. You know, I think, you know, I was working for a company, and I started to come into my own in my prime of my career. And I kind of was like, you know, I want to be at a company where I can have a seat at the table and I can be more involved. And, you know, it's funny. I remember doing the exit interview with the HR person, and she just recognized that. And she said, "You're going to be so much happier." You know, and at the time I had that like whatever attitude, you know, like with my internal HR. But, you know, if I ran into her, I'd be like, "Yeah, you're dead on." It was a good move for me right then. I learned a lot at that company, developed all my expertise and figured out what I liked. But yeah, it was time for me to go. And it sounds like, you know, the difficulty of COVID and seeing how the landscape of work is changing. I just, you know, got to see you do a presentation last week at the Milford Chamber about the changing landscape. And a lot of that is all about, you know, remote work, hybrid work. I'd like to get into that because you know, after that presentation you gave and just everything going on, my wife's in HR. I hear a lot about her view on all these things, and just like being all the stuff from the conferences I went to, this is a hot topic. And I feel like we're kind of in this, like, almost like there's going to be a big fight. Like I feel a fight coming between like to the level of like political fights and divisiveness with this topic. And I'm still trying to figure out, you know, where I stand, but it's just so complicated. I think like it can't be generalized. There were companies doing well with fully remote environments, but then I look at, like, you know, our company, like we're bringing in people with basic accounting skills maybe, or, you know, high school diploma level, and we're teaching them how to do payroll. And like, you know, I'm getting more involved in the APA, and you can turn that into a 6-figure level payroll career. Like that's what these like heads of payroll departments make at bigger companies. And a lot of times you start out, doing small business payroll for a company like mine, and it's so hard to teach these people remote. I mean, it's just hard. Now, once they learn it, they can do it remote, but and I thought of myself, and I was not capable of working fully remote in my 20s. I wasn't. I would have abused whatever company I was working for. I would have, and I kind of have a cynical, negative view of men under the age of 30 for that respect, that I would not ever want to manage a team of men in their 20s remotely. Like, I just don't think I would be feeling like a babysitter. And so what are your thoughts on that, like with remote work?
Oh my gosh, there's so many ways to go. And I have a strong opinion about remote work.
Yeah.
I was working at the consulting company that I mentioned before for quite a long time. And many people were remote, but many people weren't. I believe, and also with the future of work, it's a reality, and we're going to have to focus on it. I think a couple of things. Number one, there are times when remote doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
And onboarding is one of them. When you have a new person in an organization, it takes so much longer to onboard when you can't work with people and get to know the organization, get to know the people, get to know the culture, get to know all the little nuance things that are hard to write down.
Yeah.
There are also other times, like when somebody is looking to grow their career, looking for mentors, wants to have a promotion, or whatever goals they have, and you're completely remote. It's very difficult to do that. You made the point, if you already teach somebody how to do something, they already learn how, they can do it remote. Well, if they're happy doing that same thing and not changing, they can be remote forever.
Yeah.
But during those transition times, you need people. And so can we replace that with not being in person? That's a big challenge, and would have to be, every situation might be a little different. I would also say, though, too, some of the closed-mindedness of we can't do this remote or that remote. There are some things that can be done. And I think we're going to have to stretch and be willing to do that. Now, to your point about taking advantage, I think it's also important that this is a time where we've got to be really clear. Being clear with expectations. What do we need people to do? What kinds of things and objectives and metrics? Sometimes metrics are hard to put in place, but again, we're going to have to put the work in to do that, so that people understand what's expected of them, so that if they want to kind of hide, the metrics are going to reflect that, or the communication that goes back and forth, and the accountability. We need to have gone are the days of, just figure it out and you'll learn what to do, and if somebody's not doing their job, we'll know. We just can't do that anymore.
It's funny. I'm at a point where I have a lot of enthusiasm about my job. I really like my boss. I like where things are going. I haven't always been in positions like I am now. And I kind of, understand where I think the majority of the workforce is not kind of like where I am right now, where they can kind of almost convince themselves they're like an entrepreneur as a W-2 employee, So I think that's part of it too. Like I started thinking about, right after I listened to your presentation, I was thinking about remote work, and I started thinking about what I was going to do for this educational session I do for a networking group I'm in. And I thought of, I had two different things inspiring me. I was watching a Tom Brady interview, and then I was listening to ESPN radio, and they were talking about the Jimmy Valvano speech, or the SV speech. And he talks about Ralph Waldo Emerson quote, like, nothing great was ever done without enthusiasm. And I was like, man, that's kind of like me. That's one thing I always bring. People have always said, Matt, why are you so passionate about payroll and workers' comp? Why are you, I bring enthusiasm to these boring topics. And I started thinking, man, that really kind of is a good topic to bring into this remote work conversation. Because it's like, you have a remote company. Like, how hard is it to bring enthusiasm? to every single employee every day that like good managers do. You know what I mean? Or good CEOs do. The founder mentality, and then like that. Then you feel that as one of the key people in a growing company. Like I'm in that right now, and how do you do that for people, in a remote environment? It's got to be so hard.
It's certainly harder than when you're in person,
Yeah.
and takes a lot more energy. And I think that's kind of the challenge that,
Yeah.
and a challenge can be an opportunity. But like when you were mentioning the presentation, and with the generation, like Generation Z and Y, they're much more entrepreneurial. And
Yeah.
so I love that you even mentioned that, because that resonates with that group. And if you want to engage them, almost this remote work of here are all the pieces, you figure out how to do it. And that gives them a little bit more entrepreneurial. And then back to your point about the enthusiasm behind that as a manager, that encouragement, yes, and that energy of excitement when they figure some things out, maybe how to do something differently or how to do something more efficiently, I think could really resonate.
Yeah. I mean, I've always told, like, I'm in sales, but like, I feel like I'm a little bit different. I'm not fully money motivated. And a lot of salespeople can get by on that. Like, they'll sell anything to anybody for the right commission percentage. I have never been like that. I do feel like it is easier for me than a lot of positions that don't have their compensation tied to their productivity. I got to be motivated. I want to, half my pay is based on my performance. So like, I have to always be doing things. And I find that's another topic too, is like, if you're going to have this more enthusiastic entrepreneurial spirit within the W-2 employee class of a business, do you have to like create weird compensation models that are not just tied to, well, you did good on the performance review, so instead of 3% that we gave everybody, we're going to give you 5%. And it's like, I do agree, this younger generation, I think they want a little bit more complicated evaluations brought into it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, a couple things. So this generation is very used to the rubric, like when you're in school and how you get measured. So they are very motivated by what their report card says. So it's not just money. And to your point, not everybody's motivated by money. So it's maybe figuring out what motivates people. One of the things that's happening with this generation now is they're very motivated by mission-based things, or by what they're doing as making a difference in the world and in the community. And so somehow tying what they're doing to that. So it doesn't necessarily have to all tie back to compensation, but some of it may, and maybe different bonus models that are based on that report card. Sometimes that's difficult because the objectives change depending upon what's happening. So there might be ways to do that, but that's why it's so important to look at each situation and see what's even feasible in that situation, and then what motivates either that group of people or maybe even just the individual. And then make sure you're hiring the people that ties in to their value proposition.
Gotcha. Mission-based report cards. As somebody who, in the payroll biz, I'm actually in the report card biz. We do performance reviews within our payroll software. So that's good to hear that an expert like yourself feels the report cards are becoming a bigger thing, because there has been some HR people who criticize performance reviews and how they're done. And maybe you need to get away from the old rating scales that, we use, and there's different ways to do it. So I find that interesting. I do want to take a step back. We talked about difficulty in onboarding remote workers, and we're kind of doing this at the end of the year. This is a time when a lot of HR folks might be doing some end of the year projects. In payroll, a lot of our clients like to do like I-9 audits, and I-9 is a big topic in HR. They just changed a lot of the form, and then now they're going to this video virtual I-9 process. I mean, heck, that just happened in August. And I think if you don't, we'll be putting this out in November. So that's now mandatory. You have to use the new I-9 form if you're not yet. So look it up. But what are your thoughts on this new I-9 process?
Well, so I think the remote piece is long overdue.
Gotcha.
So having worked for a company for a long time where we were hiring remote workers, it's been such a challenge to check their IDs within the first 3 days and be compliant with the I-9s. And I have more I-9 audit stories because we did our own self audits and some of the things that we found on those I-9s and then had to put the correction. So I really encourage I-9 audits. Make sure you go back and you find it yourself before you're audited externally. But I love the new remote option. I mean, there's going to be challenges with it, and there are things that were well, let me step back and say during COVID, all of those were relaxed, which was great.
Yeah.
And there really weren't a lot of regulations behind it. But now that we have the new process that's more defined, and make sure you get on E-Verify if you want to do that. And but I think it's long overdue, and I'm a big fan.
Do you think most people know what E-Verify are? Or what it is?
So I worked for a government contractor, so it sort of seems like an easy thing, but it's the government process of verifying people are U.S. citizens or not,
So
or
it's
verifying their.
It's not mandatory for most
No, it's not.
employers.
But it has been mandatory for
Yeah.
government contractors.
We actually do a check for every single client on our payroll. I can't say all of our clients
Appreciate that.
Like when we tell them how there's lots of flags, like it's certain clients, they've got lots of flag socials, for their employees. And, I was looking at the new I-9 process, and it's good. It's good for the remote thing. And I agree with you there. I sometimes though, cause I'm going to be doing some goofy videos on LinkedIn soon. I bought a full length gray bodysuit, and I haven't fully figured it out, but I'm going to be like a character that's going to be reoccurring to talk about the gray area of payroll tax enforcement and this whole I-9. Part of me is like, this is good. You're making it more efficient for remote workers, but you've done nothing to eliminate the fraud that's going to occur in this area. So what are your thoughts on the I-9 process? How a lot of companies may abuse that, and what we have to deal with in payroll who are dealing with these folks hiring anybody who's willing to work.
Any government regulation has a lot of gray area. And I think that's why HR groups some have gone so much to the letter of the law. And then you find if you're doing what you should be doing for FMLA, you're violating ADA. So,
The Bermuda Triangle of ADA and FMLA.
Not to throw in other things, but back to the I-9, I know that there are gray things in there, and there likely always will be. Yeah. And as an HR person, you have to be comfortable in the gray and get a point of view for your company, and then be consistent across it. And I think that if you ultimately get audited and your consistent approach is proven to not be in compliance according to that auditor, you can then adjust it. And you might get a little ding for it, but it's not going to be a big violation.
Doesn't that stink though? I feel like the entrepreneurial community, the CEOs of America, a lot of them like to ask those follow-up questions about, so what's enforcement? And then now as practitioners, we're having to play this role of I had a guy yesterday who is, wants me to clean up messed up payroll tax filing because he brought on some part-time laborer to help him cut some grasses. And I'm just like, hey, most people I talk to in your industry who do that or just make them a 1099. I'm like, is this somebody you're going to bring on full-time? He's like, I don't know. And I'm just like, part of me is like, don't even set up a payroll process for someone like that. Just make them a 1099. But that's probably not really good advice legally because that person probably fits the definition of a W-2.
Of an employee, yeah.
So but I know there's no enforcement. The entire cleaning company industry has, 1099s everywhere, and they don't always fit the definition. Don't get me started on roofing. It's like entire industries are playing in gray area to where even if the federal government started enforcing their own laws strictly, it would have huge economic impacts to guess what? Roofs aren't going to get fixed,
Yeah.
So like, how do you, what are your thoughts? Isn't I guess my bigger point, doesn't that stink how we have to do that?
It's a risk management. You're always making these decisions. And
risk management's a good term for it.
I think as an HR person, I feel like bringing the risks to the decision makers, and then ultimately the decision makers would decide. In a lot of cases, it's a CEO who's usually more entrepreneurial and willing to take higher risks. So as an HR person, sometimes I might go, I don't know if I take that risk.
Do I talk about this to the CEO or do I talk about this to the CFO?
To the CFO who's much more risk averse.
Yeah. Yeah, and as a sales guy, I always like to talk to the CEOs and not the CFOs. They don't like people like me. So I want to go back to you talked about some of your HR career, but I ask every guest on the Payday podcast, what was your first payroll job where you had taxes taken out, and what did you learn that might still help you today in your career?
So I'm in the Cincinnati area. I worked at Kings Island as soon as I turned 16. I applied when I was 15, but they called me like on my 16th birthday. Yeah. And it was great. I loved it, and I learned, and I was $2.85 an hour. So if that gives any indication.
Can you guess how much I weigh? Did you do that booth?
Oh, I did not. I worked on the rides.
Oh, you did the rides.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I worked on a lot of the smaller ones in Old Coney.
You don't want to guess what I weigh. It's
I didn't.
Too big a number.
No, I didn't do
So what
any
ride
of that
did you work? Did you work any of the old cool rides?
I did all the old, like the Scrambler and the Carousel and the Dodgems and the old big slide that used to be out there.
Okay.
So those were kind of a rotation. There was a Flying Eagles thing that I worked on too. So
the old Hanna-Barbera land.
I when the slide closed, because it would always close because it would get too damp, I often got sent to Hanna-Barbera land to do those little rides.
Let's talk about a job where you can get some early experience in risk management is running rides at Kings Island. Because I was there. I'm kind of I'm getting to reintroduced to Kings Island because my daughter is 8. So like I haven't really been and rode anything. So I'm riding all the new stuff for like the first time as she gets tall enough to ride, and she'll pretty much ride whatever she can as soon as they let her. So it's kind of fun, but like I'm sitting there as a 40-year-old with my own risk management calculation going like this 16-year-old dude that looks just like he's never been out of his phone in his life I'm trusting me and my daughter's life strapped in this car, we're about to go upside down. Anyway, it's
as you get more experience, you become your risk tolerance changes. But as a 16-year-old, and I worked there for like 4 summers, and I learned the value of how hard you had to work for $2.85 an hour.
Oh yeah,
and in the hot sun, and
that's
you
hard
have to
work. Yeah,
drink lots of water. I did faint once, which was really embarrassing.
Oh, wow.
But anyway,
Stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated. I learned that lesson.
Probably lots of did they have a lot of safety stuff back then too?
Yeah. You had to go through protocols and get green carded on different rides, which meant you understood the mechanics of it. And there always had to be somebody there who had a certain level of experience.
Have most of your jobs been more, I always joke with my wife's in HR, and she'd always done, I call white collar HR jobs, and then now she's in a blue collar role. Like, do you think that's a fair analysis of HR roles? Like, because like I feel like when I was selling workers' comp services and getting involved in safety, like a lot of HR departments were wearing all of those hats, from claims to safety to OSHA, all of it. So did you have to do any of that in your HR career? Or?
I was more in the professional services world.
Okay. Professional service. So you were kind of white collar, which I know that's like its own type of, interesting stories that you probably have there. So, I call this podcast the Payday Podcast because it, that was obviously because I do payroll, but also because it's what I used to call high school football games on Friday night. So I like to compare what people do in business to positions on a football team. Now, you mentioned you're not the biggest football person ever.
Although I'll be a fair weather fan when the Bengals do well.
And
but
you asked if we could do something with tennis, and I'm not going to allow that. I apologize.
Okay, that's okay.
What I will say,
I have a backup.
I'll give you what a previous HR person guest said that they felt like, and it was a good analogy. He didn't really pick a position. He said like, well, it depends on the company. Sometimes you're like the offensive coordinator where you can be proactive to help, with your policies. And then there's companies that are very reactive with HR and you're more like a defensive coordinator where you're just putting out fires all the time. So that, I don't know if that'll help you come up with an analogy that you like, but what position do you feel best represents the HR manager on a football team?
I was going to say one of the coaches, like not the head coach, because I think of the head coach as the CEO who's really making the decisions for how the team is going to put the strategy in place. But it's one of the supportive coaches, depending upon the circumstance and depending upon what the people need. So those coaches are helping those players on the field perform their best. And I feel like the HR team is set up to help people do their best work. And that's the analogy that I would use is those coaches. They're not out there on the field doing the work unless, of course, we're an HR company, which maybe I am now as strategic HR, but normally in an HR department of a company, they're part of the team that is helping the company's employees perform the work that company is doing for their customers.
Gotcha. So if your company needs a good HR person, and now please call Becky because she is their business development specialist at Strategic HR, helping Robin out. But they're one of the best group of consultants in this market. You guys do everything from recruiting to generalist work, project work,
a lot of training,
and all types of HR stuff. So please reach out to Becky. Becky, this has been great. I feel like I know you a lot better now, and I hopefully maybe we can do this again someday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
But it's a payday. Come up on a lick. That's a payday. Come across a brick. That's a payday.